Hello, my name is Brant Hunt. My channel simply is Discerning What is True. Today is the third day of November 2025. I'm going to be reading Chapter 8 in another installment of Psychology and Kabbalah. The same author who wrote Kabbalah Traditions of Hidden Knowledge by a gentleman named Zev, Z-E-V, Ben, B-E-N, Shimon, S-H-I-M-O-N, Halevi, Halevi, H-A-L-E-V-I as in Victor. Hopefully me and Phil will get a chance to connect this week again like we did last Thursday. We were talking about some of the parts in this particular book here. Phil Langdon recommends this book highly, highly recommends this book. So that's why I am going through this, but also another particular area to do with psychology. So let's get into the book here. Bear with me. I said chapter 8, I meant to say chapter 9. Sorry about that, folks. That's my fault. This chapter is named simply Death. Let me change one other thing here, make it easier for me to read. So the chapter's name, chapter 9, is Death, D-E-A-T-H. Out-of-the-body experiences are not uncommon. They have been known to occur during medical operations and while people have been gravely ill. Yes, there is. I remember a gentleman, I think I watched this video a couple of months ago, in a very strange operation. The guy was supposedly sedated, and yet he was talking to the doctors and the nurses within the operation. He would tell them where it was at, what his issue was. This is unbelievable, but this is not, quote unquote, uncommon. Most doctors and nurses won't talk about this because it's like, okay, what, is this some kind of nut job? No, it's not a nut job. They asked him kept repeatedly, are you in pain? He says, no, I'm not in pain. Then after he was, he got around such and such and improved, they asked him, so how do you do what you did? And he doesn't remember. He doesn't remember. I thought that was really quite quaint. But that's what this kind of, people have certain experiences and do certain things, and this was kind of weird to me. But anyway, okay. So this is what they're saying. Simply, is the characteristics of the phenomena is a series of separation from the physical, so that a person finds himself above the operating table, okay, or sick bed, looking down on what appears to be a inanimate body, which they recognize as their own. So this is kind of what he's talking about here already. But this was actually, this guy was on the table, and he knew they were operating on him, and he was telling him what to do. Much has been written about this subject, and the theory is, in Kabbalistic terms, that there is a temporary detachment between Asiyati, that's A-S-I-Y-Y-A-T-I-C, sorry if I don't pronounce it right, folks, and Yezira, Y-E-Z-I-R-A-T-I-C, vehicles. This alignment of the two normally coincidental organisms of the body and psyche can also occur in traumatic events such as accidents or during acute psychological crisis. Generally, it resolves, and the detached consciousness that observes from outside the body usually drifts or is sucked back into its cohesive union as the senses regain their function and the vital principles reasserts the powerful gravity of life. Death occurs when the separation is maintained and the connection between body and psyche is broken. Many near-death experiences have been collected in recent years by qualified researchers who found, to their surprise, that such incidents were quite common when it became acceptable for people to talk about such moments. Many, like the out-of-the-body incidents, were stimulated by unusual situations such as drowning, being hit in a battle, or having accidents. After several hundred such observations had been collected, it was noted that all exhibited a distinct set of phases depending upon the length and depth of the experience. Some people perceived their consciousness set apart from their bodies, but others, on reaching the extreme of physical pain, suddenly found themselves passing through what appeared to be a dark tunnel or veil. Yet others went beyond this stage and actually heard themselves pronounced dead, for they could still hear the voices of the so-called living. Those who passed through this phase recorded that they became aware of people whom they knew to be dead, approaching them, and many were conscious of a powerful presence or bright light that spoke about their lives. This, in many cases, rapidly flashed in reverse sequence before their consciousness, as if in a review of their performance. All who reached this point said this was the frontier between life and death, and that for various reasons they were drawn back into the body, often with great regret, because they experienced a wonderful ecstasy in being discarnate. Figure 15, death. To die is when the psyche completely separates out from the body, which, having lost the vital soul or nephesh, N-E-F-E-S-H, begins to revert into its physical elements, while the ethereal field that kept the body and psyche together slowly disintegrates. Although the silver cord connection is broken, the psyche remains quite intact with all its triads and memories, which began to cycle through the mind of the dead person. This process assesses the life in a post-mortem period of judgment and rest before being reborn at an appropriate time. These records of partial discrimination found an echo in accounts of the first stages of death in such volumes as the Tibet Book of the Dead. The cultural forms, yes, I've read part of that book. I was hoping to do something with Phil. It's been about a month since I actually had a chance to communicate with Phil until last week, or even more. I'd already read partial of that book, and then I found this other particular book. I heard that him and another guy talk about this in an earlier interview, and he actually highly recommended, again, like I said, the book of Kabbalah, tradition of hidden knowledge. Anyway, I've got off the subject here, but anyway, I'd like to also go to that book with Phil, also the Tibetan Book of the Dead. The cultural form may be different, but the essence of the experience is the same. So too are the many descriptions found all over the world of the post-mortem conditions in which those who have lost permanent connection with their physical bodies find themselves. Much superstition and distortion through ignorance has blurred what has been recorded, but nevertheless the general principle of what happens between death and rebirth has been known by various esoteric traditions. The Platonic myth of Er, who was believed to have been killed in battle but awoke in his funeral to tell the tale of the process, and a classic example of allegory being used to describe events to the upper worlds. In Kabbalah, there is the advantage of the metaphysical system of Jacob's ladder, so that one can see precisely what myth and experience reveal. Taking the moment of death, and there are 903 forms of death, according to the rabbis, the way a person dies is considered as an indication of how he or she will fare in the Olam Haba, or the world to come, which means, in fact, the next world of Zezerah. For example, a righteous man or woman will die gently, like a hair being removed from a bowl of milk, but the evil person will suffer great pain as the psyche is pulled out of the body for resistance against facing their deeds in the actual replay of their lives is very strong, or they may simply be too immense or too immersed in materiality and be frightened by the separation. It is also said that when a person dies, their cry reverberates throughout all the worlds, even as a newly born babe does. This is a symbol of the cosmic effect of passing from one world to another. The rarest transformation is called the kiss of death by the Holy One, who takes a highly evolved person gently across the divide between the living and the dead. According to tradition, the Shekinah, or presence of God, comes to the good and true person, giving them the opportunity to go straight up the central axis of the ladder in a moment of pure consciousness into union with the divine. The Tibetan Book of the Dead describes the same phenomenon and urges the dying person not to be distracted from the light and so be reborn. This is a very Buddhist understanding. Kabbalah sees much work to be done in the lower worlds before such illumination, so it regards rebirth as part of an ongoing process. Every tradition has its views. Seen in greater detail, the process of dying begins with a separation of the two lowest bodies. Anyone who has witnessed someone dying slowly will recognize that sense of withdrawal, which makes them stand out in a hospital ward from those still strongly incarnated in this world. The moment of death is when the physical and psychological become so separated that the vital soul, called the Nefesh, N-E-F-E-S-H in Kabbalah, cannot keep their systems synchronized. In tree terms, the Da, or knowledge of the body, is part from the Yasada ego of the psyche, as the upper face of this physical tree becomes detached from the lower face of the psyche. At such a moment, we are told the body actually loses a fraction of its weight. The processes described in the near-death situation are then passed through, but this may take up to 3 days to complete, as the vital forces still hold the two bodies in a kind of an orbit until they are exhausted and Nefesh collapses. During this time, it is not unknown for relatives and friends to hear or see their newly deceased person. Such apparitions are based on the fact that there is still what is called the Zelem, Z-E-L-E-M, or shadow image that is held until the vital energies are spent. This is a period of taking leave of the material level for most newly dead people who accept that they have finished that life and withdrawal, having taken their farewell to those whom they love. It is also why we are told not to hold them back by excessive grief, but to help them on their way with prayer and a ceremony of saying goodbye at a funeral. This is common in all cultures. This is common to all cultures. There are those, however, who wish to stay for various reasons, such as the person who clings to their material possessions because they believe in nothing else, or those who, quote, for some reason, are excessively attached to a certain place or event in their lives and wish to relive it over and over again. I know from my situation with my dad, when he got older, he chose to move back to where he was born. And he still lived there for a while, probably 4 or 5 years, maybe more than that. But that was what he chose to do. He was living in North Carolina in the mountains and he wanted to move back to where he was born. And he could do that. He did that. Which I knew that was significant in his life. There are people who actually chose, if they have the opportunity, they will go back to where they were born in that same vicinity. It happens. These accounts for the phenomena of ghosts, which eventually disappear, sometimes only after centuries, unless someone with spiritual knowledge or psychic gifts can release them from what, in some sense, is a form of discarnated insanity. A more common form, a form or apparition is found. For example, at the sense of recent accidents where the deceased are seen wandering about and shot for a time before they realize that they are dead. A more unusual case is recorded in the Talmud commentaries of how the great Rabbi Judah HaNasi, Nasi, used to visit his home after his death on the eve of the Sabbath, to be present at the rabbinical seminar. Eventually, we are informed he ceased to attend out of respect for the other scholars. His work was done, and he had to leave them to do things their way. The initial process of dying is complete when the connection between body and psyche has finally been broken. This takes place around the third day. Interesting, the third day. At such a point, it is said the nefesh loses contact with the psyche and hovers above the corpse as it begins to decompose back into its original elements. This accounts for the quite different atmosphere found in new and old cemeteries according to Jewish tradition. The nefesh hangs around for about a year in a state called the condition of Sheol, or the nether world, that is here below, where they can still observe the living. This is why the final stone setting takes place on the anniversary of death. It's also because a year was seen as about the length of time generally required for the recapitation and purification of the soul of the deceased. I've never heard of that, folks. That's kind of interesting. Here it must be said that a different order of time was envisioned, and that a turn of the seasons on earth symbolically corresponds to the cycle of a life at the Yesariyat level. I butchered that word, sorry. Yesariyat level. During this period, the detached psyche underwent several phases of process. The first was expansion of perception as the psyche was released from the constraints of the flesh. Thus, everything becomes more intense, so that during the period of reflection over the just past life, both pleasure and pain were experienced to an extreme. This gives rise to the symbolic state of paradise and purgatory, which can be seen in terms of Jacob's ladder as the upper and lower faces of Yetzirah. Traditionally, they are sometimes called the heavenly and earthly Edens. The lower obviously relates to the level that is closest to the upper face of Yetzirah, and the superior to the lower face of Beriah. Some Kabbalists see the left and right pillars of the psyche as the severity of purgatory and the mercy of paradise. Either way, the experience of this life, of the life lived and distilled into an essence that it is stored in the psyche and remains after the old body has been discarded. Tradition adds that according to a person's quality of life and consciousness, they rise or sink to an optimal level. Gehenna, the Jewish equivalent of hell, is a state of being of those who insist on breaking universal laws. This harsh place of retribution can be with or without a body, because being at the base of the Yetzirah world, the forces in law concentrate there, often symbolized by the extremes of the four elements, such as ice or boiling. This mud operations. What is that? MUDI? Something. Boiling mud operate upon anyone who. I don't make sense. Sorry. Upon anyone who holds to a completely egocentric or a material view of existence. Such people are held in their extremes until they realize why they are there and experience guilt and then remorse. The act of repentance automatically releases them, and they rise up out of the pit, as if it's something sometimes called, because it occupies the lowest region of Zeriah. Most people, we are instructed, abide in the middle zone of Yetzirah until they have completed their time of rest, contemplation, and instruction. Those at an advanced stage of development rise beyond what are called by some the summer lands into the great silence of Beriah, the world of pure spirits. Here they undergo further training to perfect what they have learned during life. These are the true Gnostics, those who know the secrets of life and death and the reason for their existence. Here they here they bide their time, for unlike those below, they can choose when to incarnate so as to carry out some task. Most humanity, though, tradition states, goes forth and returns within the orbit of the Gaulim, that's Gilgulim, or the wheels of life and death. Each cyclical motion carries within its both collective and individual factors that determine the time and place for each new fate as it moves through its stages of destiny. But before this can happen, much preparation has to occur prior to conception and birth. And we're going to stop there. The next chapter will be chapter 10. So we're going to take a break here. Thank you for being here. Again, my name is Brant, B-R-A-N-T, Hunt. My channel is simply called Discerning What is True. And we're going through a book called Psychology and Kabbalah. So that was chapter 9. And we'll see what we're going to do here. Might fix me something to eat here, maybe doing one more chapter here. Thank you for being here. Take care.